Nothing lasts forever. Right now, emerge.
Yae Miko is finally making a comeback in Genshin Impact. She is finally returning, and with the addition of Dendro and Sumeru, she has become a lot stronger than before. Since we've gotten some new sets and things, I wanted to remake my old Yae Miko guide and update it with all of the new information you need to play Yae in the current metagame. So today I'm bringing you some tips for Yae Miko, how to build her with her optimal build, her best weapons, and kind of talking about what constellations are and are not worth it for her. If you want to know about Yae teams, or if you want to know if Yae is currently still good, I'll have 2 videos uploaded really close to this one that you can check out if you want to get really in depth with it. Also, all of the Abyss clips used in this video are with a level 1 1-star book on Miko, because otherwise the entire video would just look like this.
Right now, emerge.
My name is Braxophone, and let's take a minute to talk about today's sponsor, March of Empires. March of Empires is a free-to-play war strategy game based on medieval times, where you fight for territory and conquest. Choose your faction, train your armies, gather and trade materials to build your fortress, form alliance with other players, or even become the strongest solo player. I chose the King faction because your viewers are a reflection of you, and y'all are kings, or queens, or other royalty. We don't discriminate here. You have a complete freedom to grow your own kingdom how you like, whether that's prioritizing certain resources, leveling up certain skills to progress faster, or training specific units in order to follow a particular strategy. March of Empires also just had its biggest update ever on the 15th and introduced the Japanese Shogun faction that allows you to be enveloped by an authentic Japanese world. If you check out the game with my link, you can take advantage of special in-game VIP perks like an extra 5,000 gold to get you started building your city and progress faster. If you love strategy games, make sure to download March of Empires, available now on Android, iOS, PC, and Steam. Link down below. Thanks to March of Empires for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to the Yae Miko content. Yae Miko is primarily an off-field damage dealer with the ability to be played on-field in certain teams. Her normal attack scalings are pretty low, but her charged attack scaling is actually okay. It just costs a lot of stamina. That said, you can actually do this tech with her charged attacks where if you jump right when the fox hits its highest arc, you'll be able to cancel the animation and start another charged attack, and it can be a quick burst of damage, especially if you're just trying to finish off some enemies. Now, her elemental skill places down turrets. It's going to teleport her in a direction. You can actually just not press a direction, it will teleport her backwards, or you hold in any direction and she'll go that way. At the end of her little teleport thing, she'll place down a turret, and every single turret that you place near each other can link up. You can place down a maximum of 3 turrets at a time, and for every turret that's linked up, you're going to raise your turrets by a level, and they're going to deal higher damage. So it's important to link up all 3 turrets. There was actually a massive oversight in my opinion with this ability because there are no iframes on it, meaning Yae Miko can die or take damage during the teleport, and it's really not that great for dodging. The turrets follow standard internal cooldown rules, however, they target enemies randomly, meaning that you're probably not going to be hitting the same enemy over and over, and the ICD rule will probably not be that important. Also, they can hit Dendro cores, but they don't actively target them. They only target the enemies. Also, just note that these turrets are a single target. Now, Yae Miko's burst is actually dependent on her turrets. For every single turret that you have out at a time, when you use Yae Miko's burst, it's going to eat up all of the turrets and strike an extra time for every turret you had out. So there's going to be an initial strike and up to 3 hits if you have all 3 turrets. That's why people complain about her rotation a lot, because she has to use 3 elemental skills, then her burst, and then 3 elemental skills again. The nice thing about her burst is that it doesn't have internal cooldown on the extra strikes, meaning that every hit can aggravate, and Dendro has massively buffed it. Downside is that it has a 90 cost for energy, and so it's not reasonable to expect to be able to use it every rotation unless you're running someone like Raiden or Fischl with a lot of energy recharge on Yae Miko. When you unlock her first Ascension passive, it's going to reset the cooldowns of your elemental skill for every turret that gets eaten by the burst. So using skill, burst, skill is possible. However, it is kind of annoying to pull off, so just be aware. And Yae Miko's second Ascension passive is going to give her turrets elemental mastery scaling. Now, it's not enough to justify always running elemental mastery on the sands for Yae Miko. However, it is really beneficial in certain Dendro teams because having elemental mastery is going to increase your aggravate damage and your hyper bloom bloom damage, and that's also going to lead to higher overall turret damage. It means she doesn't have split scaling, and she gets a lot of extra value from elemental mastery. As far as talent priority, you're going to want to level up her elemental skill, then her burst, and then her normal attacks if you're going to level those at all. Yae's kit is actually really simple. It just has a couple caveats in it, but she's a decent off-field damage dealer, and now with Dendro, she feels a lot better to play. If you're before AR45, don't overthink anything because you're not going to be farming for artifacts until you get the highest level domains unlocked at AR45. Until then, you can give your Miko 2-piece gamblers if you have it, or any 2-piece that increases attack or elemental mastery. More importantly than the set, you want your main stats to be attack percent sands, an electro damage goblet, and an attack percent or crit circlet. It's pretty hard to build crit at a low AR, so don't worry about it if you can't get a good 50-100 ratio of crit rate to crit damage. For folks above AR45, you'll be glad to know that you can throw a bunch of 2-piece sets together to make her work. If you're playing her with Dendro teams, technically the new Gilded Dreams set is going to be her best in slot. It's going to give her a bunch of elemental mastery and attack based on your party composition, both of which are incredibly beneficial to her. Elemental mastery is great in Dendro teams for aggravate and hyperbloom procs, but she also gets bonus damage on her turrets based on her elemental mastery, which essentially means you're double dipping. That said, stay tuned for her main stats. If you're playing Yae in a Quicken or Aggravate team or a Taser team, you can run her on 4-piece Thunder Soother as well, which will give her a 35% damage bonus against anyone with Electro on them. When enemies are quickened or have Electro charged on them, they'll have 2 auras on them, one of which being Electro, so you can have really solid uptime on Thunder Soother in either of these team types. Outside of Gilded or Thunder Soother, you'll basically just want to mix and match 2-piece Thundering Fury, any attack percent set like Gladiators or Shimanoa, any 80 elemental mastery set, or emblem. Yae's burst contributes a decent chunk of damage, but usually it's not worth building full emblem with the intention of using her for her burst specifically. That said, you can opt for 4 emblem if you have pretty good pieces. For main stats, to get the highest damage most of the time, you'll want an attack percent sands, electro damage goblet, and a crit rate circlet. Even though EM is a good stat for Yae, she still needs a solid attack stat to get consistent value. With that in mind though, a good EM sands can come close in damage and sometimes be better damage, mostly depending on your team comp. If you're playing a Hyperbloom team where Yae is triggering most of the Hyperblooms, then EM sands on her will lead to better team damage. If you're playing Yae in a team with a couple attack buffs like Noblesse, Tenacity, Sarah, or Bennett, it can be worth it to run an EM sands since those buffs can end up compensating for her lack of attack and lead to overall better damage. Generally though, an attack percent sands with EM substats is going to be the safer bet. You want to aim for 150 elemental mastery on her at a minimum, which if you're using an EM set won't be really difficult to get. Gilded Dreams alone can get you enough elemental mastery when it's activated, and more is always better. For crit stats, the usual rules apply. You want an absolute minimum of 50 to 100 crit ratio, but you should always aim for higher, especially since her ascension stat is crit rate. For substats, prioritize energy recharge to at least 130%, then crit, elemental mastery, and attack percent. On my last Yae guide, we talked about energy recharge for Yae and how she needed a lot. At this point, though her burst does a lot of damage, in her new Dendro teams, her turrets are the source of so much of her damage that you shouldn't try and play for her burst. Using her burst is a good chunk of damage, and you should use it when you can, but it takes so many substats to build proper energy recharge for her, and she wants both crit and elemental mastery. So though you won't be able to use her burst every single rotation, it can be better to just use it when you have it, but not overinvest into energy recharge, which is why I personally argue for less. If you want to be on the safe side, you can go for 160% ER on her substats. It's basically all personal preference and team comp. Yae has a lot of different ways to get close to her damage ceiling, so pick the one that's easiest for you. I recommend Gilded because having a set of that and Deepwood can be helpful, and they both come from the same domain, so you can just farm it for a while. But if you already have good set pieces in the other sets, go for those. Next up, let's talk about weapons. Like most Catalyst characters, Yae has a lot of weapon options to choose from. Of course, her best in slot will be Kagura's Verity, which is a weapon that gives an absurd amount of damage bonus with a crit damage main stat. It's her signature. There's no real downside for it. But outside of that, you have tons of options. You have 5-star Skyward Atlas for stats, or if you have the Widsith at Refinement 5, it ends up being very strong because Miko gets partial elemental mastery scaling, so even at Refinement 1, every possible Widsith buff you can get is good, and it ends up being a great weapon for her. You could also also opt for Lost Prayers for the stats it gives, or Memory of Dust for the same thing. A lot of the other 4-star weapons end up being in a close ballpark range for damage, with the next highest recommended weapon being Solar Pearl for the crit rate and passive it has. Other choices are Nahida's weapon, 1000 Floating Dreams for the EM and support capabilities, Black Clip for the crit damage, Wandering Evenstar for the EM and the attack share, and Wine and Song. I generally avoid everything else if possible, but as long as they have an attack or crit main stat, Miko can probably get some value out of them. As for things to avoid, since Miko can actually do damage, I don't recommend Prototype Amber or TTDS, but if you do decide to go that route, you can always make her a Tenacity of the Millilith bot to buff your team's attack. Avoid the Sumeru craftable because it will siphon all of her attack. The negative part about running Yae is that the craftable weapons on her aren't great except for really Hakushin Ring and Taser, but the nice thing is that you still do have tons of other catalysts to choose from. So now that we've gone over her weapons and artifacts, I want to talk to you about Constellation Value on Miko and why it's actually sort of insane. Yae's constellations are like Raiden's in that they add a lot of damage. They're just out of order. I made this video a while back talking about Yae's constellation value, and in this section, I'll briefly cover them one by one. Her first constellation makes her burst able to be used much more frequently due to it restoring energy after using Yae's burst. You'll gain energy back for every Tenko Thunderbolt, which are the bolts of damage you deal after eating up her turrets with her burst. It's decent value because it lowers her energy requirements. Yae's constellation 2 is a pretty solid damage upgrade. Essentially, it just allows your turrets to be one level stronger and have a much larger range. Since enemies are super spread out in Abyss, it can be nice to be able to target everything, plus it's much easier to hit bosses. C2 is a pretty solid upgrade to your damage. C3 is also another upgrade to your turrets. Constellation 4 is a support ability that gives your party an electro damage bonus of 20% for 5 seconds every time a turret hits an enemy. It's only able to have one stack, but 20% electro damage bonus is a pretty nice upgrade to both Yae and any other party members, and it can have 100% uptime. Constellation 5 upgrades their burst level by 3, and Constellation 6 makes it so that Yae's turrets ignore 60% of enemy defense. Now, the reason that's significant is because it essentially gigabuffs Yae's turrets to ignore high enemy stats. It doesn't shred defense, so other characters in your party can't take advantage of it, but it will straight up not account for 60% of enemies' defense, leading to significantly higher damage. All in all, if you C6 Yae Miko, she becomes over twice as strong as C0, and with up to Constellation 2 or 3, you still see a pretty solid jump in her damage. That said, from a personal standpoint of someone who upgraded Miko, you don't really need it. Her damage is fine at C0, and genuinely the game has become so easy for me with Miko, I wish I could turn them off. When I pull for constellations, it ends up being relatively okay because it's for content and that's part of my job. But if you're a free-to-play low spender player, unless you're really dedicated to this character, you really don't need constellations for her. And getting a solid weapon on the Polar Star Kagura's Verity weapon banner would benefit you more than grabbing one constellation. Overall, constellations for her are pretty good, but as always, in my opinion, having more characters is going to be better than having one super jacked character. If you're looking for my opinion on whether or not she's worth pulling for, check out my previous Yae video. As for Yae teams, I'll have a Yae team guide uploaded soon after this one, or maybe before. I haven't really figured that out yet. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you've enjoyed, let me know by leaving a like and a comment, and consider subscribing to the channel. I go live on Twitch a few days a week at twitch.tv/Braxophone, so if you want to come hang out, ask questions, flex, whatever it may be, make sure to stop by. Until then, I'll catch you next time.